Hello and welcome to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is Tuesday, October 2nd, and it's also a pleasure to be joined here in the studio today by Mr. David Durfee, who is running for the House of Representatives seat that includes Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and a bit of Sunderland, known as Bennington 3, I believe. And Mr. Durfee, a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for making the time to be with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me in.
Mr. Durfee is running unopposed in the district, at least officially, for the moment anyway, before we get to the election on Tuesday, November 6th. He was challenged in the primary that was held back in mid-August, and he defeated Tim Scoggins, who is the chairman of the Shaftesbury Select Board. Mr. Durfee also serves on the Mount Anthony Union School Board and the Shaftesbury School Board as well. And he will be running for the seat that was held for 11 terms by Alice Miller, who was announced earlier this year that she would be stepping down from the seat, and I guess deciding 11 was enough, and going to move on to other things. Well, Mr. Durfee, again, thanks for making the time to be here. And I guess just to get us started, tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what motivated you to throw your hat in the ring for this race. I take it this is your first, other than the school board seats, this is your first try for public elected office.
It is, yes. Yeah, I've been on the school board for 6+ years, 6.5 years, I guess now. And I've always been interested in, I guess, in policy, public policy. I've known Alice, our current representative, Alice Miller, essentially since we moved to Shaftesbury 18 years ago, and been able to keep in touch with her and have the kind of conversations that we're able to have here in Vermont on issues and on legislation. So I had a developing sense, I guess, too, in the way that government works in Vermont. Having been on the school board for a few years also gave me quite a bit of insight into the education piece of state government. The education is really a partnership between local authorities and the state. So I felt when Alice said she was going to be stepping down, this might be a good time to give it a shot anyway. I'm interested in service as well, public service, and this just seemed like really the best way to try and fill that.
And you have a private sector background as well. You've run a couple of businesses, I guess. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
So I manage a food co-op just over the line in Massachusetts in Williamstown. It's community-owned, 1,500 owners, local owners. And we focus on local organic products and trying to do business the right way for our owners, for our employees, for our vendors. And I've been doing that for 6+ years now as well. Actually, started that job just about the time I got on the school board. And prior to that, had worked for a number of smaller family-owned businesses over the years. I got an MBA many years ago now, I guess, and have been working really, yes, in the private sector most of my life. A little bit of nonprofit work, and the work I do now, while it's technically private, is very much mission-oriented.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, as you've been going around the district talking to voters, what have you been hearing from them? What's kind of on their minds as like sort of the big issues that they feel are facing the district in Shaftesbury and Sunderland?
Right. Well, I'll start by saying that the fact that there's a bit of Sunderland in the district here is a function really of the population shifts, and the particular way it's configured is a little bit unfortunate for those Sunderland residents who feel closer affinity to Manchester, for example. I mean, I've knocked on a door the other day of someone who lives really right over the line in Sunderland. So, and I know, part of what I hear from Sunderland residents is, this doesn't make a lot of sense, so I certainly get that and want to, try and hear from Sunderland folks just as much as people in Shaftesbury. There's a wide range of concerns, I'd say, that people have. And it reflects the wide range of opinions and population, I think, that we've got, different backgrounds. One issue that has come up a number of times and in a number of different ways is health-related, healthcare, health insurance. The opioid crisis is something that a number of people brought up. I had mentioned it on some of the material that I put together because it's actually something that, talking to professionals, you hear say, yes, it's been in the news for quite a while, but it may be a bigger problem than many people are aware of. And in my own experience at work, we've had certainly some exposure to it in a bad way. I don't know whether here in southwestern Vermont, everyone is quite aware of how serious it is in many parts of the state, and whether and I don't have a solution to that. I'm not proposing a policy. You can't go to my website, I'm afraid. And here's what you do about that. But I think just being aware of it, and that there are programs, there are initiatives. They all require resources, of course, but just raising the level of awareness, I think, will be a good first step there. Education has certainly been a topic that people ask about. Sure. In my experience in the school board, I think people think, oh, well, here's somebody who will understand what what that's all about. I'm not running into people who are saying that they have concerns or wish we didn't have Act 46 or that they hadn't had to consolidate, but just whether the kids are going to continue to get a good education at a affordable price, tax-wise.
Right. Well, that's been one of the hardy perennials, I guess, of Vermont politics, is issues around education financing and whatnot. I guess just before we leave Act 46, though, I was wondering, down in Bennington and Shaftesbury and the whole Mount Anthony district is one of those districts that still hasn't quite found its resting point. Right. And the State Board of Education has, I believe, until the end of November to come up with their final report. What is your sense of where that might wind up finding a landing? It would still be the Mount Anthony Union District with the high school and middle school, and then there would be, another district formed with all the elementary schools?
Right, yeah. It looks like the high school, Mount Anthony Union High School District will be left intact, and when essentially as it is. The surrounding, Bennington and the surrounding towns are likely going to be consolidated into a single district. Pownell has put forward an alternative plan that leaves them alone. And it's certainly possible that the board might say, well, we're going to do that. I think every indication that we've been given up to this point was that they were not likely to accede to requests for leaving things the way they were. Okay. So it would essentially mean that the Shaftesbury School Board, the Pownell School Board, the smaller school boards go out of business at the end of this fiscal year, at the end of June, and a new board would be elected. Okay. Overseeing all those town schools.
So moving on to a couple of questions that are some of the issues that we hear a lot batted around. One of the things that keeps coming up all the time, it seems like, is the whole demographic question, and the fact that we're an aging state and an aging county. I guess Bennington County and Southern Vermont in general is suffering from that whole demographic issue more so than other parts of the state, Chittenden County being one, for instance. Any thoughts on what we might do when you get to the legislature next January? Any thoughts on what you might want to see happen to kind of try and reverse that trend? I know
Yeah.
it's a big, complicated issue, and
Right.
a lot of states are finding that themselves in the same position.
Right.
A lot of rural states would like to see more young people move there or stay there. But just wondered if you had any thoughts on how we might proceed.
Yeah, it's. I think that. Well, just to validate what you're saying, certainly in the time that I've lived in Vermont, 18 years, we've seen, and even in the time that I've been on the school board, we've seen the student population go down fairly dramatically, and we hear over and over again the numbers from the state on how the population has declined in the past 20 years. And I guess the other thing just to acknowledge is that it's not just Vermont, although as you say, I think Chittenden County is probably bucking the trend a little bit, but rural America, rural Northeast America certainly is in the same boat that we are. I think just the larger demographic trends are population and wealth as well being more concentrated in urban areas. Probably technology driving a lot of that. And I think that there's often a sense of, well, there's something we can do here. We'll come up with something that no one else has thought of, or maybe we'll introduce financial incentives, tax incentives that will give us a bit of an advantage. But obviously, everybody's in this. If everyone's in the same boat, everyone is thinking more or less along the same lines. So you might want to stop and think about what is it that makes us different to start with. I think we know we have a history, a tradition of a tourist-based economy that's fairly robust in Vermont. I think our geographic location at the southern end of the state gives us some potential advantage. We're the first, for people coming north from New York anyway, the first part of the state that you hit. How can we take advantage of that? The evolving green energy sector, I think, is something else that we don't want to lose sight of, and that obviously has implications for other things, energy policy and so forth. So again, yeah, I'm not able to come to you today with here are the set of policies that I would proceed with. I will say, just to give credit to Tim Scoggins, who ran against in the primary, he made the point that our failure to, after all these years, get broadband technology into the hills and off of the main highways,
the last miles,
has is really something that we shouldn't lose sight of. And I think that again, that's a question of resources and what are we willing to commit to it. But if you're someone who's in a position where you can live wherever you want to live, you have do that kind of work for example, you're not going to choose a place probably that doesn't have a strong internet connection. So.
Well, the Democratic candidate for governor, Christine Hallquist, has come up with an idea which sounds so shockingly simple. I'm amazed that it hasn't been thought of or discussed before, but it involves having electric utilities basically use their infrastructure and their poles and to string broadband cable along them, since electricity goes to virtually all the last miles at this point. It could be, the cable could be strung along there, and I heard her speak one time in Manchester a month or so ago, and she went on about this idea. I mean, it sounds like a fairly doable idea, and I guess the idea is that the electric utilities can borrow money at cheaper rates than perhaps some of the cable service providers are able to do. Why that is, I'm not completely clear, but I mean, do you think that idea makes sense, or is worth following up on?
I'm not. I have to say, I wasn't familiar with that particular idea, but it certainly, I think it does make sense. The infrastructure is there. You've got poles. You've got rights of way. So that seems to be, that's where I would start. or you'd think that's where one would start. But as you say, it seems so obvious. I don't know what might be.
One would have to assume there's some sort of catch somewhere.
Yeah.
Because if I'm assuming the reason why some of these sort of remote areas haven't gotten broadband access is that it's just not economic for the cable companies to string wire up all the dirt roads and to the very last house, and because there's just not enough density of population there to make that ever be profitable.
Right. Yeah. And the cost is the way that it's structured right now would need to be borne by either the utility, not the utility, by the provider, or passed along to the customer at at a rate that wouldn't be
which would kind of just not be worthwhile monetarily. I mean, another issue I just was going to throw out there, it's kind of half related, I think, to that demographic question, is the whole business around housing. I keep on hearing, young folks in particular saying, there's very hard to find affordable housing or apartments or rentals that they can afford. I mean, is there any? I'm sure there's not a silver bullet, because we would have thought of that by now to have figured something else out. But why is it that it's so hard to get more housing built? Is it just the cost of land, or are there zoning issues? What is the stumbling block that you see?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can answer that with any expertise. I think that when I've had conversations with people, I've spoken to people on all all different sides or perspectives, I guess, of that issue. Complaints or concerns about the quality of the housing stock, or rental housing in particular, and on the other hand, I hear from people who own property, who own housing and rent it out, and talk about the challenges that they face in complying with regulations, so I don't want to discount that either. I think that the regulatory environment is probably part of the issue. We've got a set of standards and processes that have made Vermont what it is, and there may be some of that may be affecting the availability of housing. But as I say, it's not really not an area I think go into too much more depth than.
What about a question that came up this past year at the legislature, boosting the minimum wage to $15 an hour, I guess by 2022, if I remember, it's going to be brought in gradually. Is that an idea, do you think, the time has come for, that we should be raising it to that level, or is that, a thing where a lot of small businesses in particular would just find it impossible to keep their employees at that rate? I've had conversations with business owners who've expressed concerns about that. The $15 is actually in Massachusetts now. The legislation has targeted that number for, I think it's 5 years out. So the state of Massachusetts will be increasing its minimum wage. That's a number, the $15 is a number that began to be bandied about several years ago in New York City, I think. And I think we should stop and recognize that there are different markets, obviously, where there are different labor costs. But I'm in favor of it, I have to say. I think that whether it's $15, probably not next year, but several years down the road, increasing gradually. And there already is legislation that's intended to increase the minimum wage over annually as the rate of inflation, I believe, or possibly it's somewhat higher than that. You may have heard the report last night on the radio about the challenges that fuel oil companies are having in hiring people, that there just aren't people willing to work, and I have no doubt that there is a labor shortage in lots of different areas, and that may be one of them. But having but there's a market for labor, and if people don't feel that
it's worth what you're being offered to pay, then that may be part of the reason as well. So gradually lifting the wage, I think, might be beneficial in ways that we're not necessarily thinking of.
Right, yeah, because I guess for some people it might not be worth going to work for 10, 11, 12 bucks an hour when they might have to pay for childcare, for instance. Which reminds me of another question I meant to ask, and this falls neatly into your background as involved in education, is pre-kindergarten. I mean, right now we have this sort of spotty here and there, but is that something you feel, as someone who's worked on school boards, followed all this, I'm sure, very closely, is that an idea that whose time has come to kind of really begin to expand that? To make
I mean, we have a system, as you say, it's spotty in the sense that it's available to anyone starting at age 3 now, but only for a limited number of hours per week, so 10 hours a week. And I'm sure that there are many parents who are currently sending their children for more than that, 10 hours, simply because they have to. And they're ending up having to pay out of pocket for the rest. And then there are probably other parents who can't afford to pay for that, anything beyond 10 hours. It's not a simple, nothing is ever simple. The supply of quality providers has been, I know has been raised as an issue that, yes, it would be wonderful if we could suddenly say to all parents of 3-year-olds, we've got a place for you now to send your children all week long, and that the education or the experience they're going to be having is a high quality one. But you can't do that unless you've got actually high quality providers. So this is something that's been transitioning in for several years now. It started out at the pre-K for 4-year-olds and then 3-year-olds. I haven't heard that there was legislation to try and expand the availability, but it's something that I would be certainly supportive of exploring.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of data and research out there that indicates that those first couple of years are really critical ones, and
yes.
Kids learn a lot.
Yeah.
Again, it would sort of take some of the onus off of young parents, who are trying to juggle jobs and childcare and.
Right, and it goes back to your earlier question about how do we, what can we do to make Vermont a more attractive state to live in and work in, and being able to say, we have this would be something that would distinguish us, differentiate us, but also, as you point out, really serve us and our future well, because the research does, I think, pretty conclusively demonstrate that it makes a big difference to have children start to get some pre-K at age 3.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there for today, but I want to thank you again for coming in, Mr. Durfee, and good luck out there on the campaign trail, although I think the issue isn't in too much doubt.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the chance to talk, and hopefully it's been helpful for watchers and listeners. Absolutely. And is there a website folks can go to learn more about some of your positions on other issues? Yes. DurfeeforVermont.com is the website, and I've got a Facebook page with more or less the same handle. Okay. So yes, you can check there. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. And you can Google that one right now and drill down into more detail. All right. Well, again, thanks for being with us today. This has been GNAT-TV's In-Depth series with David Durfee, the candidate for the Bennington 3 District, Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland. We will be having more candidates coming in between now and November 6th on Election Day, so stay tuned, and we'll see you again the next time. Thanks again for watching.